New figures looking at the number of people who've been scammed out of cash. Dan from Radio 4's Money Box is with us. He's been digging into the detail. I mean, the scale of this is really shocking.
Yeah, and it's this week that we got the annual fraud report from UK Finance, outlining how many people had money stolen from them by scammers. Now, the type of fraud we're talking about today is known as authorised payment fraud. And it's when criminals trick victims into sending money directly to them. Now, one of the common ones we've been talking about in the last year or so is these hi mum texts, pretending to be from a victim's son or daughter, contacting them from a new number. But of course, that's just the start, with the real scam starting once you've been drawn in and of course they start asking for money. Some numbers for you. Almost £460 million were stolen across all authorised payment fraud last year. That's down around 5% from the year before, so a slither of good news there. But the overall number of cases that same time has risen by 12%, with just under 250,000 victims impacted by this kind of fraud. But of course, it's really important to say numbers are only ever just that. They don't really convey the emotional or financial damage done to victims. And that's victims like Gary and Kate, who had £60,000 stolen through one of the hi mum text message scams and who have not been refunded by their bank.
So emotionally and mentally, it was absolutely horrendous. You feel completely violated. Do you know what? I remember about 12 years ago, we were burgled. That was a big deal, but at least then you could see how the burglars got into your home and you could take steps to make things good again. And you could sort of understand what happened. You could see what they took and how they took it. This is completely different.
Do you want to explain a bit about that? Hi mum is what you called it. What happened?
So basically, lots of people get targeted and they get texts or WhatsApp messages from random numbers. It's like, hi mum, hi dad, I've lost my phone, please can you reply on this number? And if the victim is particularly busy, or if in Kate's case her son's phone was actually in the shop getting repaired, it just takes, you know, for every 1,000 messages that fraudsters send out, well, it just takes one or two of those victims to think, oh, yeah, that's real, that's happening. So, yeah, it's tough, and that's what happens.
And looking at Kate and Gary, lots of people watching or watching your numbers might think, well, it would never happen to me. I'd never be that daft. Kate and Gary could be any of us.
Yeah, and we always have to remember, when we're talking about victims, they are targeted by ruthlessly efficient criminals. And this whole phrase about falling victim, you don't fall victim to fraud. You are targeted by very horrible, evil people, and they are very good at what they do, I'm sorry to say.
It's sophisticated.
Very sophisticated. And again, remember that hi mum or hi dad, that's just the first little bit. You know, if you're busy, if you're at work, but as soon as they've got you under their spell, that's when problems begin.
And we're all vulnerable as parents, aren't we? Because you worry about your kids all the time.
Fraudsters, criminals, they know how to do it. They prey on your worst fears. Yeah. They will exploit any of your fears. And of course, if you get something, you know, immediately you're going to get it. If it doesn't apply to you, if you don't have, you know, oh, how can anyone ever fall for that? Well, people can and people do all the time, and they never think it will happen to them until they do. And the one for Kate and Gary, that was extremely sophisticated. Took place over 24 hours or so. £60,000 stolen. Horrific example.
Did I hear that they have not been reimbursed?
No.
So
no.
What makes the difference as to whether or not you would get the money back off the bank if you've been involved?
Well, before we get onto that, I just want to give you some other numbers from that fraud report. Well, so here's the fraud report, all 68 pages of it or so. There is a good number in there. Of that £459 million that was stolen through this type of fraud, 62% of that was refunded to victims. Now, that's up slightly on the year before, and that's because the industry is making the right moves. It is heading in the right direction. Not as quickly as some campaigners or victims groups would like. Essentially, it comes down to whether or not your bank is part of something at the moment called the CRM code. And that's a voluntary code whereby banks are obliged to refund most innocent victims. Crucial thing there is it's voluntary. That is changing in October. There is going to be a mandatory set of regulations that all payment service providers, banks, have to follow. And that is going to be a really significant change in October.
How do you find out if your bank is signed up to it?
Well, as from October the 7th, your bank will be. They have to be. Right now, if you search for something called the CRM code online, and quite frankly, your bank should have that kind of information. If it's a main high street bank, chances are it's signed up. But these new regulations in October, they want to bring the whole rest of the industry with them.
If you think, and there's probably going to be people listening to you, Dan, right now who think, I think I might have just I might have done something. I might have, you know, gone the first step, sent some money or something. What do you do if you're worried about it? Because you might bury your head.
The very first thing you should do, always contact your bank. Tell them you're worried, you're at risk of fraud. Then, of course, call the police. They'll pass you on to action fraud. Always call your bank. That's the very first thing you need to do. They can help you. They can maybe even stop the transfer from going through or maybe claw it back. Tell your bank.
It's really important stuff, Dan.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.